The 7-step goal setting process. Number 1, decide exactly what you want. Be specific. This is really important. Decide exactly what you want and be specific. It has to be so clear a child could understand it. Second of all, write it down and make it measurable. A goal that is not in writing is not a goal at all. In fact, if you were just to do number 1, number 2, and number 3, set a deadline and set sub-deadlines if necessary. Basic rule is that there are no unrealistic goals, there are merely unrealistic timelines, unrealistic deadlines. So if you set a goal and you don't achieve it by the deadline, what do? Set another deadline. Just move it back. Obviously, you misjudged. Remember, it's just a guesstimate of when you can achieve the goal. However, with a deadline, half the time you'll achieve it before the deadline. Always when I write down a goal, which I do every day, I say I achieved this goal by this date. So in other words, it's achieved anywhere between now and then. I don't say at the date, but by this date or before this date. But by is my favorite word. I achieve it by June 30th, 2011. I achieve it by December 31st, 2011. Achieve this goal by. And if all you did was this, decide what you want, write it down, and set a deadline, it will change your life forever. I've had people who've just staggered at the difference it made in their lives to write these goals down and just set a deadline on them. But that's not enough. Number 4 is to determine the obstacles that you'll have to overcome to achieve the goal. Remember, the question that we ask is, why aren't you already at the goal? If you want to earn twice as much, why aren't you already earning twice as much? What's the reason? What's holding you back? What's the constraint or the obstacle that's stopping you? Now, in 80% of cases, the 80-20 rule applies here. In 80% of cases, the obstacles between you and your goals are inside you. They're internal. They're not on the outside. So the mark of the superior person when they have a problem is they always say, what is it in me that's holding me back? What is it in me that's holding me back? Is it a lack of discipline, lack of time management, lack of a skill, lack of the ability to perform a particular area? What is it in me that's holding me back? And when you start with yourself, 80% of the time you'll say, well, this is my great problem. I have a book called Eat That Frog, which goes 21 great ways to stop procrastinating and get things done faster. It's based on 30 years of research into time management condensed into a little book. How many people have read that book? It's a good book? It's a life. It transforms people's lives because the number one obstacle in many cases is procrastination, and it shows you how to develop the habit of getting on with it and starting your most important task and just getting it done. And when you get into the habit of determining your most important task and then just doing it, your whole life explodes. Because after that, you start to get everything done. And you start to get more and more done. And not only that, you feel happy. As you do important tasks, you feel happy, your self-esteem goes up, you have more energy, your self-confidence goes up, you're motivated to do more things. So one little problem, procrastinating. People say, well, it's procrastination is what holds me back. It's taking the first step. Well, if you can overcome that, which is a learnable skill, you learn to procrastinate, by the way, by default. So what you do is you say, well, I'm going to overcome procrastination. And don't say I'm going to do it tomorrow or next week. I'm going to take a year, and by the end of the year, I'm going to be one of the best time managers and result getters in the world. Just give yourself a year and work on it every day. And I can promise you, 3, 6, 9, 12 months from now, you're going to be a production powerhouse. You're going to be the most productive person in your industry. You're going to be getting so much done. So determine the obstacles. Now, the next is determine the additional knowledge and skills that you will require. Remember, to achieve a goal that you've never achieved before, you will have to develop skills that you've never had before. You'll have to do things that you've never done before. So what are they? And here's the great breakthrough thought that changed my life at the age of 23, is that all business skills are learnable. You can learn any skill you need to learn, whether it's prospecting, presenting, closing, hiring, borrowing money, building businesses, marketing. You can learn any skill you need to learn. They're all just learnable skills. They're just laying there. But the point is that you can learn this stuff. Number 6, determine the people whose help and cooperation you will require. Who are they? Whose help and cooperation you will require. And then assemble all these details into a plan, organize the plan, and get started. Now, a plan is merely a list. It's a list of everything that you can think of that you could possibly do to achieve the goal. And then you organize the list by priority, what should you do first, and sequence, what should you do second. I had a gentleman in my course in Sydney, Australia, and he had started off a business when he was about 20, 21. He worked his head off for 7 or 8 years. He's now 28, 29. He had a very successful business. But now he realized his whole childhood was gone. All of his friends had gone off and traveled around the world and so on. And he wanted to travel. I mean, he wanted to go to Europe and he wanted to visit Paris. And he had a good business. He'd been trying to sell his business for 2 years. And I said to him, he said, tell me, what can I do? How can I sell my business? I said, well, have you ever read a book on how to sell a business? He said, are there books on this subject? I said, of course, there's thousands and thousands of businesses that are sold every year, and there's experts who help people buy and sell business, and they've written books on it. As a matter of fact, any bookstore has a section in the business section on small businesses, and one of the subjects is how to buy or sell a business. The difference between successful, happy people and unsuccessful, unhappy people is successful, happy people have clear values. They know what's important to them, and they know what's important to them in order. For example, my highest value has always been my family. No matter how hard I work, I never have budged from that. My family always takes precedence over everything else. There's never even a question. No finance, no work, no travel, no anything else. And when you're absolutely clear about what your values are and in order, then it's easy to make decisions because that's what's right or wrong for you. And each person can have their own values as long as they are your true values. Now, how do you tell what your true values are? We could spend a whole afternoon on this, but what do we tell who are true values? Well, how do we tell our true values? Well, the answer, it is only by what you do under pressure. You can always tell what your values truly are by what you do under pressure. When you have to make a choice between one or another, you always choose what is most valuable to you. You always choose what is most important to you. So you can think about when I was under pressure, what did I do? Did I stay at the office all night and miss my child's graduation or football game or recital? Well, then what I proved to myself under pressure was that my job is more important than my family. So you can always tell when you're forced to choose what your values are. And sometimes by just simply changing your values and saying, no, from now on, I will always make this choice, you become a different person. You become a different person. And when you live consistent with your values, your self-esteem goes up, your self-confidence goes up, your self-image improves, you feel happier, more positive about yourself. A good friend of mine once said that all problems in life can be solved by a return to your values. By going back to what was true for you. The greatest of all human values, of course, is integrity. But what I've learned about integrity is the overarching value that guarantees all the others. Integrity means that you live consistent with all your other values. Is you always tell the truth, you always live in truth, you always speak the truth, and whenever you deviate from your own personal integrity, you'll always feel uncomfortable, frustrated, angry, and so on. So when you go back to the main value in living in truth, for you, you start to feel happy again, and everything starts to flow. So here's the third question, is what would you do, how would you spend your time if you learned today that you only had 6 months left to live? Imagine the doctor came to you with the final assessment and said, you're going to enjoy fabulous health for 180 days, and on the 181st day, because of a terminal illness, you'll drop stone dead. What would you do in your last 5 or 6 months? What would you spend your time on if you only had 6 months left to live? Now this is another values question. This question asks you what is really important to you in life. And you know the old joke is nobody in answering that question would write down, I'd like to spend more time at the office. When you answer this question, there's not a single material goal that appears. No money, no cars, no homes, nothing. When you write the answer to this question, they all have to do with your relationships and with your spiritual development. They have to do with the people that you care about and care about the most. And so it's really important that you be clear that if you only had 6 months to live, what would you do? And I ask these questions of myself all the time, and then I just make sure that I'm living my life in harmony with what my answers are. I'm not going to take a chance of a plane flying into a mountain and saying, darn, I wish I'd known this was going to happen so I could have spent my time differently. So it's really important. And then integrity requires that you live consistent with what you would do if you only had 6 months left to live. And this brings us to question number 4, is imagine you won $20 million tax-free, and at the same time you found that you only had 10 years left to live. This is a great question that comes from Stanford University, by the way, is what would you change or do differently for your last 10 years? Let's say you had to work at something. You couldn't just go and sit and loll around. You had to be busy at something. How would you spend your last 10 years? If you had $20 million, go ahead, write the first 3 things you can think of. Now here's the point, is this question... simply ask is, what would you do if you had no fear of failure at all? If you had all the money you needed, so you had no fear of failure at all, you could do anything you want. Many people will write down, I'd quit my job so fast they wouldn't even see me leaving. I mean, and what that means is that you're in the wrong job. If you would quit your current job if you had enough money, which many people would do, it means that you're actually wasting your life, as you're actually stuck in there, and you're probably stuck in there because you don't have enough financial reserves. And so you're caught in a bind, if you're caught in a vice, doing something you dislike because you can't afford to leave it. So when you ask this question, it'll tell you what you really should be doing with your life. You'd start a business, you'd run for public office, you would travel, you'd do things for your family. What would you do if you had $20 million? And that will tell you what you would do if you had no fear of failure at all. It's a great question to ask. And whatever you would do as an answer to this is possible for you. It may not be possible tomorrow, but it's possible for you sooner or later. So what you do is you say, well, this is what I would really like to do. If I had all the money I needed, this is what I'd like to do. Now, how can you begin adjusting your life so you do that? People often say, well, I want to start my own business, so I wouldn't have to be answerable to anybody, but I don't have enough money. Well, nobody has any money. There's 1,001 businesses you can start for less than $100. There's a book on the book stands. Go and buy the book. 1,001 businesses you can start for less than $100. You can start a business out of your home with a computer. You can start it with going to scrap meets. You can start it with services. You can start it with what you cannot imagine. So don't say I don't have any money. If you don't have $100, well, okay. So number 5, what have you always wanted to do but been afraid to attempt? What have you always wanted to do but been afraid to attempt? You've admired other people who've done it. You've looked up to other people who've done it. You wished you could do that sort of a thing. Bungee jumping, deep sea diving, starting a business, running for office, writing a book, getting it published, becoming a public speaker, becoming a singer. What have you always wanted to do but been afraid to try it?